will be going up to everybody. So a formal welcome to you all. Welcome to all of you this morning. We are meeting with Barbara Karnes, RN, and Gabby Jimenez, also a hospice nurse. Both of these women have spent decades, Gabby not so much, almost a decade, getting close, but Barbara many decades working in end-of-life care. And so wanted to welcome you all, both from the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation. My name is Susan Barber, and I curate community education programming for the foundation. Just a couple of words for those of you that might be new to us. The Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation is a not-for-profit organization that's inspired by the life of psychiatrist, humanitarian, and hospice pioneer, Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. It's in the spirit of embracing all of life, which includes death, that we further her mission and vision through collaborations, education, and advocacy. Ken Ross, Elizabeth's son, manages the foundation, and pretty much we're all doing this for the love of Elizabeth's work and for the love of end-of-life care. And Elizabeth's deeply held belief that unconditional love is the best environment and the best healing medicine that we can offer to one another. I wanted to take a moment to introduce Barbara Karnes, who has been, I think one of the very first things I learned about when I started working in hospice in 1997 was what is referred to as the Little Blue Book. I would say every hospice either uses Barbara's Little Blue Book or has a version of their own Little Blue Book that they have. But almost everybody, as I said that almost out loud, but almost everybody, any hospice program that I've ever been associated with has a blue book or a version of it. And that's when I first became aware of Barbara's work. And what I so appreciated about that as a volunteer coordinator was that Barbara is able to put some information that most people consider very scary and very alien in very simple terms. And that was just such a gift to myself, becoming a new hospice volunteer coordinator, and to the volunteers and the family members that we served. So Barbara's formal introduction: Barbara's an RN, she's award-winning end-of-life educator, an award-winning nurse, the National Hospice and Palliative Care Hospice Innovator Award winner for 2018, and the 2015 International Humanitarian Woman of the Year. While at the bedsides of hundreds of people during the dying process, Barbara noticed that each death was following a near identical script. Each person was going through the stages of death in almost the same manner, and most families came to her with similar questions, and these realizations led Barbara to write Gone From My Sight. Since that time, Barbara's written dozens of pamphlets, and what I also appreciate from Barbara is that she understands that families going through this situation are not going to have time or energy to read big, thick books about it, but Barbara's has these booklets that are so easily read and so wonderfully expressive. And we would have families from our hospice program coming to the door once they got the Little Blue Book Gone From My Sight and just saying, Mom's on page 14 now. Thank you so much. I really get what's happening. She's at the part where she's not eating now. And all of that stress about, oh my God, Mom's not eating her eggs in the morning was gone. And those kinds of gifts for families, I just can't say enough about. So Barbara, welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us. And I'm going to get Gabby down here with us. Where did you go here, Gabby? Oops. I'm going to bring Gabby Jimenez down here. Gabby is a colleague. Boy, my little screen here is getting very cranky. Gabby, I will bring you down here in a second. Gabby is also a hospice nurse. Gabby had a mid-career change to nursing, and I was lucky enough to work with Gabby at Mission Hospice during the time I was there. Gabby's a hospice nurse, an end-of-life doula, and a conscious dying educator. She offers classes online, which are hospice and doula inspired. And Gabby's goal is to encourage and support others to do this work and to do it well, and to help improve the way people are cared for while they are dying. She does private and group individual sessions. She supports people and helps them navigate for their loved ones or themselves if they are going through death experience, in addition to the beautiful work that Gabby does at Mission Hospice. And so I want to welcome you both here this morning. I also am going to just let people know that we will have you muted. We're going to have a conversation here, and please do use the chat if anybody wants to put up where it is they are tuning in from, where they're zooming in from. Any questions, if you put up in the chat, just put questions. So when I'm looking through, I know that that's something you want to ask. And also there'll be times, where for people to use the Zoom, raise your hand, which you can find at the bottom or top of your screen under the reactions or more. Under reactions, if you click that icon, there's a little place that says raise hand. That's the easiest way for me to track the order that people are raising their hands in, and so that we can call on you. But we're really excited that you're here. Thank you both for being here. So Barbara and Gabby, in addition to the introduction I gave to you, if you would like to both say just something about your work and why this work is important to you, and then we're going to go into more of a conversation. Hello, South Africa, Texas, Florida. We have people from all over tuning in here. So thank you so much for being with us. And Barbara, if you want to start, and then maybe Gabby could say something.
I hope it doesn't sound cliche for me to say that end of life work is, for me, really why I'm on this planet. Somewhere along the line, it came really into the core of my being that death is very much a part of living. We are born, we experience, and we die. And yet most of us just kind of tune into the we're born and we experience. And then, oh my goodness, it's a failure if I die or if mom dies, or, we don't see that as a normal part of life and what it's about. And so the 5 years that I was a primary care hospice nurse, before Medicare hospice, before people even knew how to say the word hospice, was my introduction and my really learning about dying. Our medical model addresses diseases that people have. And so in our medical model, when someone dies, it's a failure. And hospice in the late 70s, early 80s, thank you, Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, for bringing it to our attention, said, wait a minute. Everybody dies, and Americans in particular are not doing a good job of taking care of their dying. And so for those 5 years, being at the bedside was for me like being in school. Today you can go to courses and learn about the signs of approaching death. There weren't any in the late 70s and 80s. And so those 5 years were my on-the-job training. And as a result of what we who were on that front line learned, was that there's a process to dying, gradual or fast, and all the knowledge that today people take for granted, we learned by being there. And there's the passion. That's what I'm here for, is to share that knowledge.
Well, okay, that's what I would have said. Many years ago, it's probably about 10 years ago now, I was asked to take care of a friend who was dying. It was at a time that I was laid off from work, and I happened to be available, and he was a very important person to me. And so, of course, I said yes. And what that involved was me going to where they lived, which was Las Vegas, and staying with them for a while. I slept in the twin bed that was next to his twin bed. I sat with him, and I helped him with showering and bathing and eating. And I watched as hospice people came in and out of the room. And I thought to myself, the work they were doing, it was so admirable and so beautiful. And I knew then that this was something that I wanted to do. And I started out working as a caregiver. I got my CNA and then my HHA, and I worked as a caregiver in the homes with the elderly. And the first thing that I realized that, well, I thought that I was doing good work before that. I was making good money. I was busy. I thought I was important. I thought I was special. And I was wrong. This work taught me what it was like to have passion and purpose. And I didn't know what those two things were. As a mother, I did, because I think that you have that as a parent, right? As a mother, I felt that. But when I was sitting with people and comforting them and offering them companionship as their caregiver, I learned to appreciate so much about age and understanding that age is wasted on the young, right? Like the youth is wasted on the young. They just don't realize just how much they have available to them. And as people get older, just the things that make life more difficult for them. And so I realized that while I was caring for this one couple, Louis and Baron, both of them were in their 80s, and I took care of them. And what I realized I wanted to do was I wanted to help make their last few years better. But in order to do that, I needed to understand what that meant. So I decided in my late 40s to go back to school to become a hospice nurse. Now, that was hard in itself, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But the truth is, I didn't know anything about any of it. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it was going to be like to sit next to the bedside of someone who was dying, even though prior to that, I had witnessed death, just not to this extent. And I remember when Louis died, and they had called me and said that he died. And I walked into the room and I saw the family standing there, and they said, "Gabby, go in and be with him." And I walked into his room, and he was lying in a hospital bed, and he had these little fat chubby fingers, and they were hanging over the edge. And I walked over and I just dropped to the floor, and I sat next to the bed, and I took his hand in mine, right? And I put it up to the top of the bed so it could rest nicely. And I was sad. I was sad because someone I cared about died. And that was the first time I really understood what that meant, because I had provided care for him. I had helped him in the shower. I had helped him with his medications. I helped him with his decline. I helped him walk from one room to the other. I helped him deal with all the changes in his life, and that was hard. And it was hard for him. So then I became a hospice nurse, and I've seen hundreds of people take their last breath. And I have learned what it feels like to have purpose in the work that you do, and the effects it has on my appreciation for life and all the things that my life have around it, right? Everything that involves. Working in hospice has taught me to appreciate so much. It has opened my eyes. It has made me want to be a better human being. It has made me want to encourage others to do the same. And it has reminded me that life is fragile, and that I don't want to take any of it for granted. And I don't want anyone I know to take it for granted. So this work has inspired me. Do we talk about death all the time? Yes. Do people ask me how my day is? No, because they're afraid I'm going to tell them. But the truth is, I want to talk about it. And I am inspired, and Barbara, I know you feel the same way, is to get people to talk about it more, so that we're less scared, so we're less uncomfortable with it. People die, that's what's going to happen, but we live before we die. How could we do that better? So that's pretty much what hospice and caring for people at the end of life has taught and inspired me. It's given me life purpose.
Gabby, thank you so much. Barbara, when you and Gabby were speaking, couldn't help but reflect on my own experience coming to this place in my life. And I was raised by, I think, very typical parents for the late 50s and 60s, like Somebody put this up in the chat that they feel like Americans avoid death and conversations about death so much with this almost hidden belief that if we don't talk about it, it won't find us. So if we don't mention it, no problem, we'll avoid it. If we talk about death, then, oh my God, we might die. And I remember Stephen Levine saying to us, Stephen was a teacher who's written many, many books, and who's a colleague of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's. She actually taught him about end-of-life care, not by saying anything or teaching him as a teacher, but by them meeting at a retreat and her taking him to the local hospital where he thought, great, I'm going to be able to observe a master at work here. And she put him down next to a person who was dying and walked out of the room and left him there with a person who he didn't know at all. And he thought, oh my gosh, what I bring usually is meditation. This person does not want to meditate at all. This person's dying. And he had to really dig deep to see just what would be useful in that situation. And what he discovered would be useful was being as quiet as he possibly could, listening as deeply as he could, and then engaging that person in very short conversation. And that person was able to tell him exactly what would be useful and what wouldn't be useful. I came to this because my friends during the 80s, when I came to San Francisco, eventually got diagnosed with AIDS, which at the time was just a death sentence. And the family that I was raised in really believed that we were going to avoid death. It wasn't talked about in our family. When my grandmother died, I was 7 and I was very close to her. It was traumatizing because she was dead and then we just never talked about her again. And the way we heard about her dying was my mother screaming and collapsing in the kitchen, which was very traumatizing to her children. And then being told, everything's fine, just get on the school bus, you're going to be late for school, finish your breakfast, everything's fine. And then just never speaking about my grandmother again. So from the time I was 7 until I was 30, I avoided death like the plague. And what was so shocking to me, 3 years into my friend Jeff's terrible dying, he had a brain cancer all over his brain, and the doctors had never seen it before, the way it manifested with him. So they gave him 3 months. He lived 3 years because he went to support groups. He did a lot of really pro-social and proactive things, which were nothing like the life he had before he got diagnosed. And when he died 3 years later, I had avoided him up until that last month. And I was so fearful that when I sat by the bedside with him for the very first time, I was grasping his hand so hard that it was like, I think, hurting him. And I heard these words that Stephen Levine had said in a workshop about softening your belly. And you can keep your heart open in hell. I was like, I'm from New York. We don't talk like this. Like, what the hell is going on right now? But this transformation that happened with Jeff and I, the quieter I got, the more profound my time was with him. And what I discovered when Jeff died was that this experience brought me closer to, I think, who I really was as a person and what I wanted to be able to offer in the world in a way that nothing else had. And it really pointed to me, you don't need to understand what's happening here, but you need to show up because this is going to be the most important work in your life. And that was in 1988. So that was a long time ago. And since that time, there's been lots of deaths. But this, you know, for me, it was not easy. It was painful. It took a lot of learning, a lot of making mistakes to go from somebody that was literally hiding out in my house, praying to God that this person who was ill did not call me, to being somebody who's an end-of-life educator. That was quite an arc, but I just, for anybody listening to this, I just want to say that when my friends started getting sick, I thought, just like most people think, this is a mistake. This is a terrible thing. You know, death should happen like some other time to some other people. But the reality is death happens to us. It will happen to everybody we know. It will happen to everybody we love. And it will happen to us at some point. So thank you both so much for being spaces where these conversations can be had, where we can talk about this. And one of the things that I really appreciated in my own trajectory through this experience of being with people dying has been that transformation from that being such a horribly fearful place to being a place where this is a normal experience. This is, at this point in my life, I feel like all of my life experiences are leading to my death. And my death is a culmination of everything I have learned my entire life. So to pay attention now, to really pay attention now, and to get to my deathbed with as little regret as possible. So I think for both of you, I would imagine you have worked with people that have had deeply held regrets at the end of their life. I'm curious if you would each maybe just say a little bit about what those might be, I know Elizabeth's work, Stephen's work, a lot of people who do this work you know, the hard part is when you get to somebody's end of life experience and they don't understand, like, was my life meaningless? Did I, you know, what is this? How am I dying now? So could you speak a little bit about those experiences and maybe how you work with people in that place? Maybe Barbara, if you want to say something about that.
Well, as you were talking, I want to set the groundwork in that when the dying process begins from disease or old age, let's talk about disease. That process begins months before death actually comes. And it's in the months before death that we consciously look at our life, where we may talk with others about it, but it's in the months before death that we say, what have I done? Who have I touched? What has life been about? As death gets closer, the person is withdrawing from the world around them. And so they're not verbalizing and sharing to the extent that they did in the months before death. In the weeks before death, when that person is going within, they're still processing their life, but they're beyond words. You know, it's not like you can go in and say, tell me what you're thinking, because they've gone within. And so that what has my life been about is on an inside level that they probably won't and can't share with anyone else. But I do believe that right up to the actual moment of death, on all different levels, we're saying, what have I done? Who have I touched? What has this been about? So in the hours, even days before death, when a person is non-responsive, is when I encourage family and significant others to go in alone and sit down and talk with their loved one and talk about the good times, talk about the challenging times. Not that you're going to get probably any kind of response at all, but the person that's dying is like, life is a billion-piece jigsaw puzzle, and they're trying to put all those pieces of their life together. And so even when they're non-responsive, on some inside level, they're still putting those pieces together. And so we can talk and help them.
You know, I think one of the things that I see most often is when someone is given a diagnosis, when someone is at the end of their life, and when someone is saying goodbye, the thing that affects them all is the reality of how little time you have left. Time is, we don't appreciate it, you know, until we realize we don't have much more left. You know, when someone is dying, of course, there's a lot of the common things that they are feeling regretful for, right? They didn't live their life to the fullest. Maybe they didn't say all the things. And like Barbara said, you know, getting people to say those things at the bedside is very important so that those last words are said. I think that the most regret that I see isn't necessarily from the person who is dying, but the people who are saying goodbye, because they're starting to realize all the time they wasted. You know, they talk about the things that, you know, let's say, you know, someone's husband is in that bed and she'll say, you know, he always wanted to go here and we never did. Why didn't I say yes? And so there's this regret that people feel that they didn't spend more time, or when someone who is maybe in their 70s, 80s, or 90s is dying and their children haven't spent much time with them, right? In fact, maybe they even live out of state and they're only there now because their mother or father is dying. And they realize, I didn't spend time. They asked me to come for Christmas and I didn't come. I'm too busy. I've done too many things. They didn't watch my kids grow up. We didn't have those family moments when we should have. And so I think what happens is the regret comes from the people who are going to be left behind, the ones that are saying goodbye, because they know there are no do-overs. They know that that moment they're sitting at the bedside is the last one they're ever going to have with someone they love. And all of a sudden, the reality of how much time was wasted hits them hard. And I think that, and I'm not going to speak for you, Barbara, but I think we come from the same mindset, which is if we could encourage people to say the things, of course, at the bedside, but what if we do it sooner? What if we get people to say yes to more trips or more fun times or more family gatherings way before that diagnosis? How can we do that? You know, we can't go back and do things differently, but we can do things differently moving forward. And I think if we could find a way to live the time that we have now better, to imagine that today, this is our day. This is all we can be certain of. This we can be guaranteed. We can't be guaranteed tomorrow. So to put something off it could be a moot point, right? Because we might not have that. So perhaps what death is teaching us is the quality and value of time. We regret how much time we didn't spend, how much time we didn't do things with the people that we love. And I think that that is the biggest regret. And you don't get to do it over. So how could we do it moving forward based on the information that we have now, learning what we have learned working in this field, but also knowing that the reality of death is around all of us at any time. We have to be able to learn how to appreciate the time and the people in our lives better now that they're right here with us.
Can I say something you brought to mind? One of the key things this work has taught me is every night before I go to sleep, I'm in bed tucked with my kitties, and I say to myself, what have I traded a day of my life for? What was good about today? Those two questions I ask myself every night. And that started when I was taking care of my mother. My stepfather died 5 months later, my mother died, and I moved her in with me. And I'd tuck her in bed at night, and I'd sit on the side of the bed and I'd say, what was good about tonight? What was good about today? And she'd say, you know, maybe it was we watched Wheel of Fortune on the sofa together, you know, but it was the night she said to me, I can't think of anything good. That I think that was the moment that it taught me how precious and valuable life is and how easy it is to not appreciate it, how easy it is to be on this gerbil wheel that most of us run around and round and round, going nowhere and not looking at the beauty or the value of each day. You know, it may be I watched the squirrels eating in the feeder or the blue jay that comes to the window. You know, it doesn't have to be some huge, huge thing, because seeing the blue jay, that is a huge thing. That is touching into the beauty of life when most of us are so busy on our gerbil wheel that we don't see that.
You know, we learn so much from this work that we do, and a lot of it is from the people that we take care of. I had a patient, he was young, too young to die. And he had this thing hanging on his hospital bed. And it was one of those clickers that, you see if you go to a movie or a big event, they click how many people are in there. And I asked him what it was. And he said, it's my joy counter. And I said, what does that mean? He says, well, I mean, I'm going to put it in my words, but basically that, everything that he was going through, every day was a struggle, but every day he tried to find joy. So he would count his joy. And so when I would start coming to see him before I'd leave, I'd push the clicker, and he said, well, what did you do that for? And I said, because this was one of my joys. Well, shortly before he died, I was sitting with him, and he whispered to his wife, he said, should we give Gabby one of the joy counters? And she said, yes. So they brought out a little joy counter, actually 3, I got to pick from one of them, and they gave me my own joy counter. Well, what that reminded me was to find joy in every day. And if he can do it, a man in his 40s, knowing that his life was about to end, if he could find joy in his day, then I should find joy in my day. So very much like what you said, if we can't find joy in our day, then that's on us. But there is joy. And whether it's the blue jay or our kitties that jump and make funny faces or whatever it is they do, or our grandbabies, or just watching someone be kind to another person, that is a joy for me. If we could make sure that we find just one joy in each day, maybe that'll make a difference in how we start the next day.
Thank you both. This conversation, Barbara, early on when you were talking about, people close to the end of their life, they don't have the energy to really engage in like a philosophical discussion about what went right in that relationship or what they could have done better or differently. But it just reminded me, and my mother's dying, which was different than anything I'd experienced. I'd either had very sudden deaths where it was completely unexpected, or long protracted deaths where, you knew for quite some time that person was going to die. But my mom got sick and died within 10 days. So just enough time for her kids to get there to spend some time with her. And during the 10 days I was there, we had a very contentious relationship our whole entire life. And of course, on her deathbed, I realized oh, perhaps we're so much alike. Maybe that's why. It, of course, was my biggest thing all my life. Don't be like mom. But here I am on my mother's deathbed, realizing oh, look at this. But it was so interesting because it was such a contentious relationship. At one point, my mother said to me, because she would say things like, I love you. And then I'd go out of the room and say to my sibling, did she just say, I love you? Is she loving us now? Is that what's happening? And they'd go in and have that experience, come back and go, I think that's what's happening. And I'm so glad you're here, because I would have nothing to compare this to. I don't really know what's happening right now. But she did, in those last 10 days, become this incredibly loving, happy to have us there, wonderful kind of person. So for me, I was very regretful. Why didn't we have this for the last 20 years of our lives together instead of the last 10 days? But she said to me at one point, and it took a lot of energy for her to get this out, because she was on medication and she was groggy. But she said to me really clearly, Susan, promise me that you'll remember these times. And I was so taken by that. And I was like, Mom, I love you. And that was something that I could never, we would say it perfunctory at the end of the phone call, because you're supposed to say that, but there was no feeling there really for either of us. But in those last 10 days, it was really there. And I am so grateful that I had spent all this time going to conscious living, conscious dying workshops, because walking into her room, I was dreading that moment so much, but crossing the threshold and really understanding she's dying allowed me to let go of a lot of my, the anger, or just make space. The anger's here. It didn't just disappear. I didn't forget about those first 62 years, but for there to be more, that there could be something else in addition to that. And when she asked me to remember this time, I really understood she was pointing to this time where we really love each other and we're not engaged in all of the kind of ego craziness. And she didn't have time for a big discussion about it. She just had time to ask, could we do this? And I was grateful. I don't know why. And I was able to say yes, and really mean that that's what we're going to do. And, those last 10 days for somebody who was dying and spent the whole 90 years of their life really keeping death at arm's length, she really was able to engage with asking, am I losing weight? I'm not eating. It's I'm great on our deathbeds. this is still what women are still worried about. Do I look thinner? I was like, you look really thin, Mom. You haven't eaten in like 10 days. You look great. And she was like pleased with that. And I just thought, boy, the ego never goes away. But it was such a really, those moments of beauty and those moments that just that I could have missed that moment if I was on that hamster wheel when she asked that question and really missed. She apologized the next night. She just said, I'm just so sorry, Susan. And I really got that it was about our life together. And I said, me too. Like, I'm sorry also. We had tried at different points to repair it. But I think, there's so many things that are possible when people are at end of life. I don't recommend you waiting to have any big philosophical discussions, but to be able to say simple things and to be able to put aside, I think, I don't know what we were thinking for our whole life, but this, for my mother, it was very clear this was the end now for her. And so she just gave up all of the ways she kept people out. And that was a really incredible thing to witness. And Gabby, your point about being with people and the joy in life. There was a gentleman I was visiting as a volunteer who had ALS. He was about 6'4", and he had been a Franciscan brother. He was a religious man his whole life. He had come to San Francisco to care for his brother when he was dying of AIDS, and realized that so many of his brother's friends in the 80s didn't have any family to care for him, that he got together, he put together a bunch of donations, bought a house in the Mission District where people that had AIDS and other diseases or homelessness or sort of dual diagnosis could come and die. And here he is all these years later. The foundation he set up had sold the house once he was diagnosed, thinking he would die in a certain amount of time, and he was still alive. So they had to move him to a hospice house because they had sold the house he was living in. And I remember saying to him one day, we were talking about Stephen and Andrea Levine because he loved their work. And I just said, all of this work you did talking to people about death and dying, and now here you are on your deathbed with ALS. And I said to him, I know I'm projecting, but this is the number one thing on the top of my list of ways I do not want to die. ALS is right up there at number one. So here you are, a huge, big, active man laying in this bed where somebody has to scratch your nose. You can speak. And he said to me, Susan, put your head next to me on the pillow. And so I did. And there was a window. And he said, I get to look out this window all day long. And it's San Francisco. So sometimes it's gray, sometimes it's blue. Look at the clouds out there today, though. And we just watched the clouds for a couple of minutes. He said, and my friends, they put up that bird feeder. He goes, look, there's a hummingbird right there. I just get to watch the hummingbird. And he explained to me kind of what his day was like laying there. And he said, the reality is now, Susan, after all my life of giving to so many people, all I get to do now is lay back and receive all the love that I'm getting. Mm-hmm. And I just was so moved by that experience, that all of these simple things in life that we take for granted were not available to him at all. And it didn't matter to him. He just was going to accept the love that was coming his way. And that kind of joyous living was it was remarkable to be in the presence of that and have it so integrated. It wasn't like he was making this up to feel better. This was really how he was navigating the end of his life, which I was like, oh my God. I mean, he's got the oxygen concentrator going and, keep him breathing, and just, he died, I think 3 or 4 days after we had that conversation. And I was just so grateful that he shared that with me, that was what was important. Most people I've talked to at the end of their life, it's not the trips to Egypt to see the pyramids. It's like I walked on I was walking with my grandson when they said, Papa, or, it's the simple things in life that are what people take out with them. Maybe it's just I haven't been with a lot of uber wealthy people, but it's not those big, gigantic things that we spend our whole life trying to accumulate. It's very simple ways of being with each other that people seem to appreciate most at the end of life.
You remind me of something, and actually I'm really thankful for it, because you made me remember something that I realize is now a gift. I didn't have a close relationship with my father, and about a few days before he died, he asked to spend some time with me, and it was right around Thanksgiving. So I said, of course. So I went and I picked him up, and I brought him to my home. And for Thanksgiving, we all gather around and I tell everybody to say something they're thankful for. Well, when it came to his time, he said, I am thankful for my daughter. She is such a good mother and she works so hard. And he said these things that I had waited my entire life to hear. And there was a part of me that was much like your reaction, which is, Really? Why now? Well, he died like maybe 3 days later. And part of me wonders, did he know? Because he was ill, did he know? Did he want to make sure that before that happened, he let me know that, those were his feelings? I will be forever grateful for that, because as a child, I would have liked to have heard that sooner, right? But I still got it. These are words that I got to hear. And I think that, it's a gift. I had to sit back for a moment and think, okay, where was that coming from? But what I realized now when I was listening to you talking is that it is exactly what it was. It was a gift. And I'm very thankful for that. And sometimes we wait until that very last minute to say the things. I wish people wouldn't. I wish we could say all the things, so there's no question or uncertainty at the end of life. Like, I want everyone in my life to know how just deeply, fiercely I love them, and they do. But some people just can't quite say it. They don't get to say those things. But even if it's the last thing you say, it is a gift.
I guess it's your father and mother and my father and mother were raised in kind of a similar kind of post-depression, post-World War II, like you keep your feelings close, you keep your cards close to your chest, and those kinds of sort of emotional expressions are just not, that wasn't the way they navigated.
There wasn't a lot of that.
Not a lot of that. Barbara, please.
This reminds me of a story that I just love. James Dillett Freeman, a Unity minister, author, wrote a story about a king, and the king died. And the angel is talking to the king and says, tell me the 3 greatest things that occurred in your life. What is your legacy? What have you left behind? What are those 3 things? And the king looks at the angel and he says, well, my subjects loved me, and I think that I really guided them and took care of them. And I I kept us out of war, and I kept us in peace, and I was respected among all of my subjects. And the angel said, well, yeah, that's all well and good. But what really was important was the night you sat by the fireplace while your cat was dying, and you held that kitty and you loved it. The night that you made love to your wife under the moonlight, and the day that you played with your grandson, even though you had other business things you wanted to do. There's the legacy. And I remember that story, and I remind myself that story every so often, because I think we get so caught up in the bigger picture that we miss the interaction, the gentleness that life is.
Amen.
So true.
That. Yes. This is reminding me of a story, Gabby. I think I probably have told the story here, but I was training a group of volunteers, and it was a Saturday. I was at Mission Hospice, and a woman came in who wasn't with our volunteer group. And I realized, she thinks it's the Saturday grief support group, but that was happening it was every other week at that time. So she came into the room. I explained, I said, we're doing a volunteer training. I'm so sorry, there's not, the bereavement group meets next week, but I also could tell she really needed to speak to somebody. And I said, could you wait here a minute? I'm going to go see if our social worker is in yet, because I'm sure that they'll be able to meet with you and give you the grief schedule and blah, blah, blah. So I go to see the social worker. She's there. She comes on out, and the woman says to me, thank you so much, because you're the volunteer that's been with us has been fantastic. And when we moved from the coast side to the mission house, she actually comes now, even though it's like an hour to come and go. And she just, thank you so much. So I set her off with a social worker. We did the hospice training, and like we did our break, our morning break, bathroom break, whatever. And I go into the woman's bathroom, and this woman is in there now. And she says, "Hi, it's you again." I said, "Oh, hi, we're just on our break. And do you want a cup of coffee? Were you able to meet the social worker?" She was really teary. And I said, "You mentioned the hospice house." And she said, "Oh, I was there." So it was kind of new to us. And I was interested to know, like, was this right? Was this right? And she was saying, "Oh, the medications are great. The staff was really blah." She said, "All of those things," said, "it was really great to have pain medication. All of those things were good." But she said, "What was the best thing? My husband was a difficult man. He was really a difficult man. And we didn't have a lot of friends because of how difficult a man he was. And I had told him that I would always take care of him at home. And then I couldn't. And I felt like I failed him so miserably. Then we brought him to the hospice house. And you people just loved him." And she started crying. And she said, "The medication and the symptom management and sort of the professionalism there was very comforting. But what was important to us was that you loved him." She said, "When my husband died, he said to me, 'I didn't think this was possible. They love me.'" And he was only there for 4 days. So for him to have that kind of transformation, his own transformation, to realize that he was a lovable person, he could die feeling loved, she said to us, that's the part that matters. And so, I think that we can talk a lot about techniques and skills. And I remember Ram Dass saying, especially at the bedside of the dying, you want to come from your soul and not your role. And I also know, getting trained, we're trained about boundaries and boundary issues and keeping boundaries. And when that woman said to me, what was the most important thing was that you all loved my husband, I said to her, I'm so grateful now to work in a hospice program where that's our job. That's our job. And we can talk about that. And, every patient doesn't land like that, but we can love patients. And that is an okay thing, because really she said, that's the best medicine you can offer. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about boundaries and how you navigate, that word, and what does that mean? And, we had a lot of training around that for our volunteers and also for our staff. But when that woman said that to me so clearly, that's what mattered to her and her husband, it was like taking off a huge weight that I could just throw on the ground and be like, what are you talking about? These people are dying. Like, we don't need to be like protecting ourselves. We need to be able to support what's happening. So I'm just curious if you want to say anything about that.
Well, I'll happily say it, since it's the thing I'm the worst at. I need to learn how to set boundaries. Hi, my name is Gabby, and I have a problem with setting boundaries. When I first walk into a home and I meet with the family and the person who is dying, it's like nothing else matters. All that matters is that moment that I'm with them. And sometimes I just, sit down with them, and I just stay until I know that they feel less fear, maybe more supported. Maybe I've given them some education and some tools so they feel confident that they can do this work on their own. I can't leave until I know that there is some sense of peace or comfort there. And so I probably stay longer than I should, and it is a problem. I would tell you that I'm working on it, but that's not the truth. The truth is, I'm going to keep doing it that way, because when I walk into someone's home, it's all about them and that moment. But as far as setting boundaries, like, I am learning now that after someone has passed and I have extended my condolences, I may check on them once or twice, because sometimes you do get close. But I am learning that I was where I was supposed to be at the time that I was there, and that's okay. One of the other things that I am learning is that I might be with a family for weeks, right through the entire process of his decline or her decline. And then the day that she dies or he dies, I'm not there. And I struggle with that, because I want to be there. But what I have come to accept is that, again, I was there when I was supposed to be there, and that's okay. I am learning to accept the moments and not go, okay, well, I'll be here for this, I'll do this for that. No, I'm here right now. I'm going to do the very best that I can. I'm going to be with you completely. I'm going to hand over my tools, and I'm going to leave. and someone else is going to come in and be there for you too. And that's why we're a team. We are a team. We do this together. And I think that is the boundaries that I am learning, is that I don't have to be there for the whole experience, and that the time that I am with them is enough. And to be able to not get too emotionally invested to where it starts to weigh heavy on me. I'm getting better at that too. But this work is so intimate and so personal, and we're invited into their very lasts of a lot of different things. And I do feel it deeply. I find a connection almost every time, and I want to see them through it. I want to honor the promises that we make. And I do struggle with walking out the door sooner rather than later. I do stick around a little longer. Last night I did the same thing. I was with a family, and the family that was left behind was very young, and they were going to, they didn't know what happens when the funeral home comes, and they had a lot of questions, and they were just super uncomfortable. And so I just stayed. I stayed until the funeral home came. I saw them through that. And yeah, it was a little longer, less sleep. It was late at night. It was midnight by the time I got home. But it mattered to me that their takeaway is that they felt supported and cared for well, and that the person they love was cared for well. And I did see them through, and that matters to me. So I think I have to pick and choose my boundaries. I'm working on it though.
I think when I was working in, and I guess I still believe this, that most of the people that I work with and am involved with, I'm taking care of and sharing as children of God. And I just am there with them. Every once in a while, someone comes along that gets into Barbara's heart, that meets a personal need within me. And a long time ago, I acknowledged that that was okay. Now, if every single patient and family that I took care of filled a space within me or a void within me, I would not have been able to stay in this work. And I would have had to say, why is my life so empty that all of my patients are filling a void? Yet I accepted Charles, the father that I never had, that I took care of for 2 years, and I grieved for him. But most of my patients were children of God. I learned also that I needed to have closure with every family and patient that I worked with, because I did give a part of myself, and I did let a part of that experience into my heart, and that I would carry with me forever. So I needed closure. And I strongly recommend that all of us who work in the end of life develop our own ritual for closure. Mine was going to the visitation and seeing the body and talking to the family. Today, that isn't as common as it used to be. I also didn't go and don't go to funerals, because funerals are about listening, where visitations are about visiting and interacting. What I recommend today is for you to think about what your closure ritual can be. It may be having a journal where you write the patient's name and the date that they died and a couple of sentences about that life and that relationship, but some way to close the book so that you can move forward into other relationships.
this is a great conversation. One of the things, I have a ritual. Rituals are so important. I have lots of them, but I do something similar. I am learning to, when I walk out the door, well, first of all, you know that hug they give you after someone has died and you're leaving, that look in your eyes when they say thank you, it fills me up, because you know that you did something good that day. You know, those are my moments of joy for sure. But I get in the car or I wait until I get home. But either way, I really honor the experience I had. And I think about them. You know, I have my grief bowl, which I've shared before. I pull out my grief bowl, and in my grief bowl are a bunch of hearts, all different kinds of hearts. And I take the hearts out and I just put one in my hand, and I feel each one individually, but it's all about the lessons. What did I learn from this experience? What was one of the gifts that I will take with me forever? And I honor the person who died. I honor the people who said goodbye. And I really make this a ritual and celebration of each experience, because while they all have the similar outcome, it's all unique. You know, every single death, every single life that we witness end is unique. And the people who are left saying goodbye, they're unique. And so I like to try to honor them individually. And that's my closure. I say goodbye to them. I wish them well on their healing grief journey. And I honor myself for the work that I did. And then I always think about my lesson or takeaway, because we learn constantly, right? We're never going to know it all in this field. And each family teaches us something. Each patient teaches us something. So I really focus on that. And that is my closure. That's my routine, my ritual.
Thank you both for that. You know, I think also for family members taking care of somebody, or as a person who's going to die, if there's something that's really important for us, to make sure to let people know that. I want certain music played, you know, I'd like to be in a certain place. And so that's great if I want those things, but if I don't tell anybody, it's very unlikely they're going to happen unless magic. But I think also for me, with like my mom, with people that I'm with when they die, my ritual is that I sit quietly with them. And there's often an opportunity when I'm with them by myself and other people have left the room. I actually tell them they've died, because I've been with a couple of people who've told me they've been in comas where they kind of had awareness that they were in the coma. It took them a while to figure out what was going on, but they were in an unresponsive coma. And so it was 6 months before they said, it's like when you're having a dream, when you keep trying to can talk to people and you're very clear about what you want to say and nobody can hear you. And this guy that was in a group I used to facilitate told us he was like that for about 6 months. He heard everything that was being said and he was very confused, and he heard a lot of conversations. And then he started realizing that the word he kept hearing was coma, and he realized they were talking about him. So when somebody dies, I've always said to them, you know, I don't know if this is helpful to you, but you've died. If you think you're having a dream, or if you think you're in a coma or any of those things, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. It seems like you've died, and you can keep going wherever you're going, and we'll take care of what needs to be taken care of here. So you can just keep going to wherever it is that you're going to next. I have no idea, because nobody's come back to say thank you. That's been very helpful, Susan. I have no idea if it's helpful or not, but I did have my my dear friend, my brother from another mother, Charlie's family, come into the hospital room when I didn't know that. They had come back in, and they were a very traditional African-American Baptist family. Charlie had made me promise him that I would not let their pastor pray over him, which was a little hard to promise, but I did promise him that, and that did not happen until his funeral service. But in the room when he was dying, he was just really my bossy personal assistant. You know, it was just really those moments, right? There was a lot of energy in the room, a lot of people in the room, and then they all went out into the hallway. And I just told him, because I wasn't sure, just, you know, who knows what happens in those moments after death. But his brother came in to look and listened. And then he didn't say anything to me, but after, at the reception that was at the house that Charlie and I used to live in, he came up to me and he said, "Hey, that was really cool." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "I came in while you were telling Charlie he died." And I thought, what a great idea. Who knows where we, like, how are we supposed to know what to do? thought, I have no idea how we're supposed to know what to do, but just in case it's helpful, I'm going to let them know what's going on. But then also with people I'm close to, like with my mom, I cut a lock of her hair and we bathed her and put her into clothing that felt more appropriate for her to leave this world in. And that ritual for me was very important. And I think for families to be thinking about it, because that moment of death, even though it's not a surprise when you've been with somebody that you're caring for months or years that dies, it's a shock when they're dead. I think that it's just like the difference between even like just end of life breathing and that space where the breath has stopped and the person's body has kind of stopped. It's a sort of, to my body, it's shocking. My body's kind of like, whoa, what's going on there? So to have a ritual and to have a way to approach those moments, thought out prior to them happening, I think can be really helpful. And this is one thing that the volunteers, there's a couple of questions that have come up that I want to just pose to you both, but one is about volunteers. One of the people here works in our mission house, so thank you so much. And they were just talking about the role of the volunteer in hospice. And I will say, as a former volunteer coordinator, we've had everything from somebody just going to get groceries to somebody who actually is here on the call. She grew up in France, and she said to me, as a hospice volunteer, I never imagined that the most important thing I'd have to do is learn football, because she would go every Sunday to this 90-year-old gentleman who loved football. She didn't know anything about football. And when she first arrived, she thought it was soccer. So, these are some of the things, but we've also had volunteers at the bedside of patients that they've seen for months and months and months. And they realize, we had one volunteer sitting with her patient, and the daughter and son-in-law came in, and they had had a very difficult relationship with the mother who was dying. And she realized, like, they were standing in the corner of the room, and she went over and she said, oh, she talked about you all the time. And I know mothers and daughters always have word, but she said, she told me about the cookies you used to make. And she started to tell the daughter the stories that the mom had said. And the daughter started weeping. And this husband said, thank you for telling her this. Like, her mother's always so critical. She said, well, she's the mother, and then she kept talking to her about all the stories she'd heard. And as she was doing that, she gathered the two of them closer to the bedside. She said, kind of look how I'm sitting. Just sit down in these chairs here. And, if you want to just put your arm just gently around to her shoulder. And, just to sit here. And then she got up, and she moved to the other side of the room so that the daughter and the daughter's husband could have that time. And she said, you can just say anything you want to say, because this might be the last opportunity to have to say anything. And they just looked at her. They were like, oh, thank you so much. Is this like what we have? Is this what we do? And she said, yeah, this is what you do. And then if she stops breathing, you just call hospice and they'll come right out here. So about a half an hour later, she got a call from the husband who just said, thank you so much. We had no idea, like, we could just do that. It was so beautiful. She said that changed the entire way that my wife thinks about her relationship with her mother. And I never understood that story until my mom died. So I think there's some really beautiful and very simple things that the volunteers can model. But could each of you say just a couple of things about, and the volunteer who's here, well, she's now a volunteer coordinator and helps and she's up at a wonderful hospice up in Washington. She just sent a chat saying, I use that story about having to learn football when I'm training my volunteers. And they say, well, what do we do? So could you both talk a little bit about volunteers and kind of how you have worked with volunteers as nurses and some of the things you've seen? And then we're going to talk about grief.
Barbara, you want to go?
I think volunteers play such an important role. It's almost the role of the neighbor next door. There's expectations for professionals, I put that in quotes, and for volunteers, there doesn't seem to be that, I'm going to say, barrier that can often be there. And of course, in hospice as professionals, our job is to make sure that barrier isn't there. And yet oftentimes there's the professional and the person. And with a volunteer, they come in like this. And they're the friend. As a nurse, I want to be the friend, but it's there with the volunteer from the very beginning. Is I'm your friend, and let's, how can I help? And to me, that's the core of what the volunteers are about, is that friend support, I'll talk about anything, relationship that is being built. I also, I'm trying to think of how to say this. Volunteers, without offending anyone, I see volunteers as the heart of what hospice is. It's just a natural part of the heart love that a volunteer brings. And there's all kinds of roles that of the volunteer. With some hospices, and this is part of my soapbox. I'm going to go there, although I don't even know if it's really appropriate. But with yeah, I'm not going to do it. Volunteers are such a special part. There are hospices that have no one dies alone. I'm doing it. There are hospices that have no one dies alone programs. And the idea is that no one should have to die alone. And so if there's no family or anything, then the volunteer will go and sit with the patient. I would love to see, as part of volunteers across the country, that every family, every patient has a no one dies alone volunteer, a transition volunteer. It's lovely that there is someone there to be with someone who's alone, but really the person that's dying is totally withdrawn. They're the little chicken working to get out of its shell. They're busy. It's the family that needs the support and guidance. And unfortunately, in today's hospice environment, families are alone when their loved one dies at home. And I don't like that. I want someone with the family. And that, to me, is a key role for volunteers, is to be with that family and support and guide them. And I hope I didn't offend anyone.
Go, Barbara. You just go. You just get on that soapbox and you just let us all hear it. Woo! Barbara, I couldn't agree with you more. I totally agree with you. We have this conversation a lot, you and I, about how we feel, especially about doulas, for instance, bringing them in, helping them guide our volunteers who are already doulas. Volunteers are my favorite people. The work they do is amazing. They are incredibly unselfish. Their hearts come from such a generous place. The question, what can they do? I think, first of all, I'm on the soapbox with you. I think that we need to find a way to get them more integrated in the care that we provide our families. I am blessed to work for a hospice where our volunteers are we do vigils often. I've seen them stay throughout the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and there they are with someone who's dying alone. And that just fills my whole soul up. And it needs to be done more. And no one should die alone. There are some that might choose that, and we have to respect that. But for the most part, I don't think people want to take that last breath alone. And so how can we change that, right? What can we do differently? How can we improve the way people are cared for when they die? Well, it starts with making sure they aren't alone. And most of all, making sure they don't feel alone. Letting someone know that you're there, even just, saying the words, I'm right here. I got you. That's huge. I think that one of the things that I think, if I was to hand over a tool to a volunteer, although I think they're the ones that can hand me tools, but is the art of listening, is to listen with the intent to hear, not to fix, not to offer a suggestion, not to say what you would do or how you would do it differently, but to hear. Because if someone is lying in that bed, they're probably close to dying, or certainly aware of the fact that they are close to dying. And there's stuff they need to say. They might not be able to talk to their family for whatever reason, right? They might not feel comfortable sharing some fears that they have, or concerns, or maybe there's something that they just want to get off their chest. Volunteers have sort of the luxury of time in that they can sit with them longer than, say, a clinician can. And so they're there a little bit longer, which means that is an opportunity to build trust. And if you can sit with someone and offer them the ability of knowing that, number one, they're not alone, but that they are being heard, right? To listen, just to let someone know that their words are validated and that they've been heard, that is a gift. And I think that is one of the gifts that our volunteers bring, is that presence that says, I'm here, you can trust me, you can tell me whatever you need to, I hear you, and it's staying right here, safe. And it's one of the gifts that they can, because they do have the luxury of time. I wish that I could sit longer at the bedside, but many times our volunteers are providing companionship and respite. And so they get to have these really good, deep conversations. And that's that moment where this person who's lying in this bed can really be open and honest and share things that are maybe kept locked up. And so that I see the role of the volunteer as filling gaps, of course, but also offering that safe place that they might not have, which isn't against their family or loved ones in any way. It's just that when you're dying, there's so much stuff going on, and you're so worried about what everyone else is feeling about your dying process that it's hard to find a safe person to say, I'm scared. And many times it's the volunteer that gets to hear these words.
Thank you both so much. I would tell volunteers in the first night of training that their role is so unique, because if somebody's ill, somebody is dying, they understand why the doctor might come out to the house to see them if they're lucky enough to have a hospice where the doctor goes out to the house to see them, or why the nurse is there, or why the home health and bath aide, if somebody's going to come to clean them up, why that's happening, or the social worker. They don't usually understand that. Spiritual care, they can kind of understand. So, but then the volunteer shows up and you're just a person that wants to help. And I said, I think often that is the experience that shifts them from this place of this horrible, terrible thing to a place of curiosity. Why would a total stranger show up for this if I'm so afraid of it? Like, what could it possibly, maybe there's other possibilities here that I'm not seeing. And that is all happening wordlessly. The volunteer isn't saying any of those things, but just the presence of a person showing up and being willing to, just not being willing to enter into that space, but, lovingly entering into that space of support. I think for many families and for many people, that can be a real tipping point about, this is different than I thought it might be. And we've had volunteers that have done remarkable things and allowed families, for some people that live alone. This has changed now in so many hospices where their jobs are to limit liability. But in the old days of hospice, we would have volunteers going and staying with people that lived by themselves, whose spouse had died, this particularly during the AIDS epidemic, where people were, by themselves because their spouse had died. And so volunteers would just go in kind of, 12, 15, 16 hours a day, in shifts, to just keep an eyeball on that person so that they knew there's people nearby. You call us if you need anything. We're here. You're not by yourself. I remember one woman in particular who was she and her wife were so independent, one of the first kind of out gay couples in a very conservative community. And the first woman was younger, and she died before the woman who was expecting that she'd be her caregiver. And when that other woman got sick, just a few months after her partner died, her only goal was to stay in her house. And she was so angry at her wife for dying before her. And we're like, don't worry about that. We're going to do everything we can to make that possible. So it really was the role of the volunteer made that possible, that they were able to stay at home. And so I'm going to go to some questions now here. Somebody's asking, and we talked about this earlier, a couple of questions about grief. And I know Gabby, we talked about this before we started this meeting to ask if this would be okay to share. Gabby's just recently has had a death in her own family that she attended that was unexpected, and she is very involved working with grief personally and also professionally right now. And just wondering if Gabby, if you could say just a little bit about that. And Barbara also, just, the grief shows up long before the person has died, and working, in hospices is part of that work that everybody on the team does, is supporting that anticipatory grief experience that the families are having. And then your own grief, both of you have worked for years with people that are dying. What do you do with that grief when everybody you work with dies? It's not like some people graduate, but 99% of the people die. And how do you manage your own grief?
So I, of course, I've seen hundreds of last breaths. I've witnessed people have anticipatory grief, preparing for how they're going to feel when someone they love dies. I've watched, someone at the bedside watch their loved one take their last breath. And no matter how much time you've had to prepare for it, it's as though it's the first time it's happened and you had no idea it was coming. I've seen sadness, so much sadness. And, I have lost family members and I have lost friends. And while I felt a sense of sadness, I think this work has heightened my realization of how powerfully deep grief can be. And I lost my brother. He was in the ICU for 18 days, and I saw things from a different perspective. And I was there. I was there when he took his first breath, and I was there when he took his last. And that was really hard, but it's taught me so much about grief. If you are on my Facebook page at all, the Hospice Heart, you've probably witnessed a lot of my personal shares there, because for me, writing helps, right? But what it's also doing is teaching me how the layers of grief, the different ways it feels, the different ways it hits you, the reactions that you have, how just like painful it can be, while at the same time beautiful. It's hard to really put into words how grief evolves with us. And the reality is that grief never ends. And so how can we navigate our life moving forward while we are trying to process the fact that we've lost someone that matters to us? And would it be okay if I read a poem?
Yes, please.
I can't promise that I won't cry, but it kind of tells me what grief is teaching me and how it feels for me. And it's about my brother, but I think that it resonates for many on what grief feels like. And it's titled, "Sadness is Woven Deep Inside of Me." I woke up early this morning with the reminder that you are no longer here. I felt this sudden sense of sadness and my eyes filled up with tears. The sobs are much quieter now, as though I'm keeping them to myself. It's like the ache I feel when I think of you is stored safely on a shelf. I can reach for it when I need to, or pretend it isn't there. But sometimes it sneaks up on me, a reminder that my sadness is everywhere. It's in the songs that I hear playing. It's in the shows that I see. It's everything and everywhere. It's woven deep inside of me. Sadness stays forever. It is never going to leave. Sometimes I'm okay with it, but other times I cannot breathe. As I lay in bed and cried today, I whispered out your name. I told you that I missed you, that life will never be the same. The sadness will never leave me, nor will the love I have for you. I'll take it off the shelf again. It's what I need to do. I have to work through this, all the feelings and my pain. Tears are falling from my eyes like a stormy winter rain. But that for me is healing. It brings comfort from the start. In many ways, each time I cry, it's as though you are visiting from my heart. As I wipe away my tears and I take care of myself, I'll say goodbye again for now and put you back upon my shelf. And I think that is what grief is. It's this thing. It's tangible. It's that you feel it. And sometimes you have to put it away because it's just too much to try to move through your day with. But the thing about it is that it's on a shelf that's reachable, right? So you can take it back off when you need to. And I think what we need to learn how to do is feel comfortable with taking it off the shelf sometimes. You know, we need to say their name. We need to celebrate their life and their death. We need to remember those anniversaries. We need to check in on people who have lost someone because it never goes away. And as long as it is on a shelf that is reachable, and as long as we are given permission to bring it off the shelf, we can navigate it easier. But to keep it a secret, or to tell someone to stop talking about it, or to suggest that someone get over it, is not healthy.
That's a good deal on this one.
In any way.
1 second.
I have to get out of this.
Somebody accidentally unmuted themselves. Gabby, thank you.
You're welcome. That's kind of my take on grief. I'm learning.
Thank you, Gabby.
There is nothing I can say. You just said it all so beautifully, just beautifully. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you, Barbara.
Gabby, would you be okay sending me a copy of that poem, and I'll send it out when we get the link to this recording and include it in the email that I sent? There's a number of people
Sure.
asking for this, and it was beautiful.
Thank you.
Grief.
Thank you for letting me read it. Actually, it feels good to read it.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think there's any way to do this work and not grieve for people that you care for, even with all the boundaries in place. If you get to the point where you're not feeling any of this work, then it's time to do something else. So thank you. And I know with your own family, it's so different. I know with my mom and my father, it was as if I had never done a minute's worth of end-of-life care at all. And I was on the phone all night about the medications and the breathing and the grief later. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to look
When hospice showed up at my door to take care of my mother, the first thing I said to the nurse is, I am Barbara, Dorothy's daughter. I am not Barbara, the hospice director or executive director. I am Barbara, the nurse. And one day, Diane, the nurse, was there, and I said to her, what do you, how long, you know, the magic question, how long do you think we're looking at? And my husband is walking by and he hears me say this. And after Diane's gone, he said, Barbara, you trained her to be the hospice nurse. How could you ask her how long? And I said, because I'm not a nurse. All my knowledge is gone. I am Barbara taking care of Dorothy.
Thank you. Barbara, when I called my friend Diane Gillen, who may or may not be on this call, she and I started working together hospice in 1997. And so she was always a role model for me. And I must have called her 4 times the night my mother was dying with these questions. She'd be like, I would start out any volunteer training I gave saying to anybody in the room, you have to understand that when death comes to your own family, you are going to be the spouse or the mother or the daughter or the person whose loved one is dying. And you can just take that hat off, all this training, and just put it in the closet somewhere. Sometimes it might be useful, but most of the time it won't be. And I made so many calls that night, and every single one of them, the response was, Susan, you taught me this, but I'm just going to repeat back what you said. I said, that's exactly why I'm calling you. Tell me what I said, because I'm just the daughter now. I'm not the person that knows anything except that my mother's breathing sounds like the train going off the track for 12 hours nonstop. So yeah, it was like, she's like, well, remember this abdominal breathing. And I'm like, okay. And then I hang up in a couple hours. I'd be like, whatever. So I just want to tell people, and I was so grateful so grateful to be able to have that experience, because it means that I wasn't like this quote that Ram Dass would tell us to come from our soul and not our role. Like the soul, just not as in a religious kind of way, but just whatever is most essential about us. This is the place we want to be relating from. The rest of it, like all of our tools and all of our role, is just a way to sort of protect ourselves and sort of a way to lead in. But people want to know who's showing up at my bedside, not, let me see or nobody's asked for a CV or a resume. Somebody's showing up at their bedside. They want a loving, caring person that will listen to who they are and what they're about and what's important to them. So yes, thank you both for sharing about that. I'm going to go down this list because there are questions here. This is all about sharing personal losses. Yes, and also to the point here that somebody posted, society forces us to get over our losses and bereaved, go into silence. We get 3 days off, even in working in a hospice, somebody that you love dies and you have 3 days off and then you have to get back to work. So there's a lot of work that can be done there. Let's see, it says here, I was a nurse of 40 years and loved working with both the patient and the family. As a volunteer, I find myself more comfortable with the patient. What is it that I could do that would make me more comfortable with being with the family? Anybody want to speak to that?
I would say, I'm sure Barbara probably has something as well, but remember that you're human with another human who is saying goodbye to someone they love, and come from that place, come from your heart place, and share that with them. Let them see that you're human. And, when I walked, I was off a month after my brother died, and my very first day back, I walked into a room where there was a man who was dying, a young man, and this woman was sitting next to him. And she looked up at me and she said, how do I say goodbye to my brother? That was my first patient I saw after I came back after my brother died. Well, I think of this in any of our roles, right? We have to come from a place of knowing what it feels like and being human. I sat right down with her, and I'm not a volunteer, but I am a person who sits at the bedside, as the volunteers are. And I just said, I know how this feels. This is what worked for me. And just, say the things, tell him how much you love him. I mean, I shared all that, but I sat down and I kind of put the nurse hat off, and I was just a human. Whether you are a hospice volunteer, whether you are a clinician, whether you are a brother, sister, mother, father, daughter, at the bedside, just be a human with a heart, and lead with your heart, and imagine what they're feeling, and just support them with that. Come from your heart space.
Also, and I love that, absolutely. It's okay to say, I don't know.
Yes.
We think that because someone asked us a question, we have to have the answer. And it's okay to just say, I don't know. I'll try and find the answer for you if it's an answer if that's possible. But we hesitate to say, I don't know. And I think we can use that a lot. It's okay. I don't know.
Because it's the truth.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just don't know. And, I'll just sit here and hold space with you, and we'll figure it out together.
Well, we are just about at time. And I just want to thank both of you so much. I'm going to just formally close, and also I'll stay in the room for a couple of minutes afterwards. But to all of you who spent this time with us this morning, please just thank you so very much. And I am going to be sharing something in chat. I will try to do this, Monica. And I just want to thank both you, Barbara and Gabby. What a wonderful, wonderful experience we've all had together. I just am so grateful to you both. And we are going to be offering a talk with Gabby and Barbara quarterly. So we had the first one we did this year was in January. We're in April. So July, I think it's July 5th is our next one. So right after 4th of July. And I just want to say to everybody from on behalf of the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation and myself, just to thank you all for being here. And we are going to turn off the recording now. You're going to hear a little message about that. And then I will, thank you.